It's so good to see each and every one of you tonight. If you take your Bibles, please turn to Genesis chapter 32. Genesis chapter 32. And so we didn't get a chance to finish Genesis 32 last week, and so we're just going to finish up with that last little section where Jacob wrestles with a supernatural being, and we're going to ask ourselves the question, what was it? Was it God or was it an angel? And so if you look at that passage, that's going to be in Genesis 32, verses 22 through 33. And so Jacob sends everything over the Jabbok River. He's been fleeing Laban, his uncle, where he's been the last 20 years. And so while he's been there those last 20 years, he's acquired a lot of wealth. He's acquired 2 wives, 2 additional slaves of those wives, whom he also has children with. He has 11 sons. He has at least 1 daughter that we know of. And so he's a very wealthy individual, but he's also very afraid because he knows that his brother Esau is coming to meet him. And the last time that he saw Esau, which was 20 years ago, Esau said, when I see him, I'm going to kill him. And so he's very afraid. He sends his family across the river, and it's there where Jacob has a wrestling match. And this wrestling match is very famous. So I know you've probably heard sermons or classes on this wrestling match. But Jacob wrestles with someone all night long. When Jacob gets done with this wrestling match, he calls that place Peniel, which means, like, here I've seen God. I've seen the face of God, and I've survived. Now, the question is, who does Jacob wrestle with? Because he's 97 years old. And we already know that they don't age like we do at this time and age, because Jacob's obviously living a very different life than most 97-year-olds in our day and age was. The man was a bachelor until he was 77, and he's had at least 12 kids since that time frame. And so, but he wrestles all night, which is kind of ironic because Jacob has the personality. He's wrestled his entire life. And he's wrestled with his brother Esau. He wrestled with his father. He's wrestled with his uncle Laban. He just has that personality. And so it's very symbolic that here he wrestles with this being all night long, and he will not give up, not until that supernatural being touches his hip and puts his hip out of socket. And he says, I won't let go until you give me a blessing. And so the being gives him a blessing, tells him he's going to change his name from Jacob to Israel, which means he who wrestles with God. And so the question here is, was it God or was it an angel? The word that is used here is Elohim, which could be a supernatural being. 1 Samuel 18:13, the spirit of Samuel was called an Elohim, or it could be a heavenly being, Psalm 8:5. But Elohim is also a name used for God at various times in the Old Testament. And so the question has oftentimes been, who did Jacob wrestle with? Did he wrestle with God, or did he wrestle with an angel? Well, the text doesn't really tell us very clearly that Elohim is either God or an angel, because as we can see here, the word is used both ways in the Old Testament. Once again, those references are on the board in front of you. Now, in Hosea chapter 12, verse 4 gives us probably the closest indication, because Hosea is actually talking about this exact thing that takes place. And here he says that Jacob wrestled with an angel. And so does anybody have any questions or comments on Genesis 32, 22 through 33, 32, with Jacob wrestling with this angel?
My King James Version says wrestling with God.
Yeah, and that's a translation of Elohim, because most of the time, especially in the narrative of the Pentateuch, when you see Elohim, most of the time it's referring to God. But it could, just like 1 Samuel 18 and Psalm 8:5, could be referencing to a supernatural being. And so that's where the confusion is.
Isn't there a differentiation between the word for angel and the one that translates the angel of the Lord? I seem to remember from classes in the past that there was some inherent difference in that. The angel of the Lord might be some manifestation of God in that form.
Yeah, the angel of the Lord is the Hebrew word melach is the word for angel, and to my knowledge, it's the same word that is used. It's just used in conjunction of being the angel of the Lord, and so it's attached in a possessive way to the Lord. How it's used there, and honestly, I have to look at. I don't know what divination of Lord it is, or whether it's Yahweh or Elohim or one or the other, or El. I'm not sure. But there is we talked about that some whenever we were talking about whenever they came to see Abraham back in Genesis 18, I believe it was, whenever the angels came before Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot. And so there were some that would contend that every time that you see the angel of the Lord, that is a pre-incarnation of Christ. I'm not in that camp, but there are some that believe that, and we feel very strongly about that. So it's a good question.
Is there any significance that his name was changed to Israel at that time?
It is, and in fact, we're not really given much about the idea. A name change symbolizes two things. Number one, it symbolizes some sort of authority. And so the other name change that we've seen so far has been with who? Really, two people, I guess you could say. Right, Abraham and Sarah, right? And God changes their names. And so here God is he's picking Jacob, I guess you would say, to be the new covenantal blessing. And we're going to see that in 2 chapters in Genesis 35. He's going to re-emphasize that new name he's going to give. And so here we see this new name given to Jacob. And it's not really talked about much in our passage, but he's going to highlight that more in Genesis 35 whenever God extends the covenant to Jacob. But it's very symbolic. It really is. And really it's interesting because not only is this a good name to characterize the life of Jacob, but what else does it also characterize really well? Yeah, his descendants, right? Israel. I mean, Israel means he who struggles with God. And could there be a better name for the nation of Israel? I mean, ever since they come into existence, they're always going to struggle basically with their faithfulness and with God. And so the moniker works really well both for Jacob but also his descendants. Good.
Would an angel to give him his blessing and name?
Yeah, good question. I'm not sure of another incident where an angel changes someone's name. Now, there are incidents where angels give names, like in the early chapters of the Gospels, whenever the angels let Zechariah know that his son's name is going to be John, or when Mary is told that her son's name is going to be Jesus. And so those are those are angels giving what their names are going to be called. And then there's debates on whether or not it's the angel of the Lord, if it's a deity or an angel itself talking to Abraham and Sarah. So,
Do that in the authority of God, though?
Right. They would have seen whatever the angel said to be from God. He's just a messenger. He's just the one relaying the message. And so they would have seen his authority coming from God himself. They wouldn't have seen it as two different things, if you will. It's kind of like if the president sends an emissary to the king of Spain and says, give us whatever, or we're going to nuke Barcelona. The king could say, the president just said he's going to, nuke Barcelona. Did the president really say that? Well, yes and no, right? The emissary said it, but it actually came from the president. So it's kind of one of those things. So
Here in the story of Joseph, they don't call him, you call him Jacob.
yeah. And so he may not have always gone by this. It may have been more like a symbolic name, just like some of us sometimes have two names that we go by, right? You might, like I think about Ricky. Ricky's Rick in Nashville and he's Ricky in Chapel Hill. I think about it, Andy Brothers is Andy here, but in Nashville he's Rex. And so sometimes we, have multiple names is not too uncommon even for ourselves. Yes?
Is there any significance to why he said wait for daybreak?
It's a good question. I don't know. Do you think there is?
It's a dream, wasn't it?
Well, no, I think he actually physically wrestled with the supernatural being, with the angel. And so. Do you want to elaborate on the wait till daybreak? Okay, no. I don't know of anything, but it could be. I don't know. You were smiling like you knew something back there. It's like, okay. Good questions and comments. Anyone else? No? Well, let's see what takes place the next day. And so here we have this dream. He's waiting for this reunion with his brother. On this map that you can see here, and I apologize, I know these words are going to be hard to see. You can see Seir in the south. That blue line is going to be Edom. The blue line is going to be Esau, and Esau coming up to see Jacob there at Peniel. And then we're going to see what takes place here when they meet. And so Jacob meets Esau. And if you will, let's go ahead and let's read that passage. Let's read verses 1 through verse 11. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants, and he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah and her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. And he himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times, until he came and met his brother. But Esau ran out to meet him and embraced him, fell on his neck, kissed him, and wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children, he said, "Who are these with you?" And Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given to your servant." Then the servants drew near, and they and their children all bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. And Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" And Jacob answered, "To find favor in your sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." And Jacob said, "No, please. I have found favor in your sight. Then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that I've brought you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough." This he urged him, and he took it. And so here we have Jacob, and Jacob divides his family up basically in terms of least to greatest, right? And so he takes his children by the servants. He puts them in the first group. He takes Leah, whom he loves second, puts them in the next group. Then he takes Rachel and Joseph, whom he loves more than everything, puts them in the end. That way, if Esau starts killing people, then he'll be the first one to go like a man, and it gives everybody else a chance to get away, which probably isn't going to work anyways. And so what does Jacob do before he gets there? He bows down 7 times, which in the ancient Near East was a customary way to approach a king. And so you can see a lot has changed in the last 20 years in both Esau and with Jacob. Because, Jacob has, we've already talked about this last week, how he sent him so much livestock. It was more than some ancient cities sent to Assyrian kings. And so that's why Esau goes, who are all these people? And what does Jacob say that these people are? Or where their origin is, I guess you would say. Right? Gifts from God. God has blessed me. And then Esau says, "Look, take your stuff back. I don't need it." Which tells you something about Esau, right? He's pretty rich, right? If he's got 400 men with him, and you have all this huge gift, and Esau's like, "Man, let's just go ahead and keep it. I don't need it." And it's interesting here because you kind of see Jacob giving back the birthright that he kind of stole from Esau. Because, number one, part of the birthright was wealth. Jacob's giving that back. Part of it was prestige. Now, if you remember, Isaac told Jacob that he was going to be lord over his brother, and he told Esau that he was going to have to bow down to his brother. Who's bowing down to who? Jacob's bowing down to Esau. Right? And so he's essentially kind of giving back that birthright that he had stolen in the first place, because he doesn't need that birthright anymore. Why? What has become evident to him these last 20 years? God's blessed him. He doesn't need to cheat and scheme and connive his way to wealth or to prestige, because God has done that for them. I think it's really interesting how he doesn't mention God at all pretty much the entire 20 years that he's in Laban's house. But here he goes back to Esau, and he says, "Everything that I have is because God has blessed me." So you really see that Esau, you really see Jacob starting from last night with wrestling with the angel, that he's really started to have this spiritual transformation, if you will, and we're really going to see that come to play in the next chapter. And so Jacob says, "Here, take these gifts," and Esau says, is Esau's reaction surprising? Yeah, it is to Jacob. It is to us. The last time we read this thing, this guy's vowed to kill him, right? And it's not just like he's indifferent, right? He rushes out to meet him. Jacob thinks he's rushing out with an army to kill him, but he's rushing out with an army to see him. He meets him, he hugs him, and he kisses him and says, "Man, I've missed you." And so completely not what we were expecting from Esau. And then Esau extends, and we're not going to be able to read it for time's sake, but in the next few verses, 12 through 20, he asked Jacob to come back and to live with him. He says, man, come stay with me in Seir. Just come, you can bring your people. There's enough room. Just come on down. And Jacob says, I appreciate that. Yeah, we'll definitely come down there with you. And he says, let me give you some of my servants. I've got 400 guys here, and you've got all these animals and these livestock. Why don't you take some guys to help you with the animals and for your protection? Jacob's like, no, not. I couldn't ask you to do that. That's very kind of you. We've actually been running really hard for the last several days. Everybody remember how far we said the average caravan traveled in the ancient world from last week? 13 miles. How much land had they covered averaging a day? 30. Right? So is Jacob lying when he's saying, if I press the children and the livestock hard one day, they're all going to die? Maybe a little bit of hyperbole, but they're probably really tired. I mean, they've been running ragged for quite some time now. And so Esau buys it, and he's like, well, let me help you. He's like, no, we got it, man. We'll come down and we'll see you. And so Esau says, okay. He goes down south, back to his homeland there in Seir, and Jacob follows him, right? No, he doesn't follow him at all, right? Esau goes south, Jacob goes west. And so does Jacob lie to Esau? Yeah. And so Jacob hasn't gotten all the way there, right? And so it's hard to just flip a switch and change everything about our characters, right? And so it takes him a little bit of time. Is he showing more faith and trust in God? Yes. Does he still have some of that fibbing, kind of trying to get by with his own schemes and wiles type of thing, hold on to him? A little bit, right? We're not going to see the full change of Jacob, at least not for another chapter. And so he goes over to Shechem. Shechem is an extremely important place in the Old Testament. It's 35 miles north of Jerusalem. Jacob, when he gets there, he builds an altar to Yahweh, and he refers to the God of Israel as the God of Israel. And so this is a name change. Not only has Jacob experienced a name change, this is not the God of Abraham or Isaac anymore. This is my God. This is the God of Israel. And so you start to see that growth there in Jacob's life. The cool thing is that Abraham made a sacrifice and an altar to Yahweh 200 years earlier in Genesis 12, 6 through 7, when he enters into the land of Canaan. He makes an altar there, and 200 years later, his grandson is doing the same. And so it's kind of a neat thing that takes place there. Any questions over what takes place in Genesis 33?
Did you find it interesting that Esau's reaction to Jacob is similar to Joseph's reaction to his brothers in Egypt?
Yeah, and I think it is interesting because something happens in 20 years, right? And the thing is, what happens? The sad thing is we don't know because the text doesn't tell us this, because this isn't the story of the Edomites, it's the story of the Israelites, in the covenant. But yeah, it is interesting. And I do think, just like in this next chapter, the key verse in Joseph's story, Genesis 50:20, you meant it to me for evil, but God meant it for good. And so I think that you could even play that verse really with any story so far we've had in Genesis. But, Jacob meant it for evil whenever he tricked his father Isaac with Esau. But God used it for good. Same thing with Laban. Laban meant it for evil to trick Jacob to work him for so long. But it worked out for good because Jacob winds up with 4 wives, technically, basically, with 12 children and the start of a nation. And so it is interesting, but I think you're right. I think maybe that's why you see that, because God has obviously blessed Esau very richly in these last 20 years, just like he's blessed Jacob. And so, maybe he sees that what Jacob did was wrong, but it got him out of the way for 20 years, and he was able to spread his wings and make his own, proto-nation. And so, yeah, good comment. Ben, you got a comment back there? No? Okay.
Jacob's followed closer to him now than he was before.
Well, he was always his favorite, right? And so that's the interesting thing to me, is that it seems that Isaac is probably either in Bethel or Hebron. Probably Hebron right now. Could be in Bathsheba. And yet Esau, his oldest son, is in Seir. It's kind of interesting. Maybe they hadn't gotten so large that they had to split, kind of like an Abraham and Lot situation, because we know that Isaac is super wealthy, and now obviously Esau is too. And so it's a good question.
There's also a thought that Isaac knew that Jacob was coming back, and the land was to go through Jacob, that Isaac did the same thing with Esau that Abraham did with Isaac's brothers and relatives, that he sent them away. Not really explaining why he was sending them away, but sent them away.
Yeah, and I didn't think about that, but that's actually probably very plausible, because where did Abraham send? Well, because where did Abraham send his other sons? Remember, the text says he sent them east, right? And if you look at Bathsheba and you go straight east, where do you find? Seir, right? And so, I didn't think about that, but they send him away to marry within the family to preserve that family line, if you will, that bloodline. And so, yeah, that's actually a really good comment. And so maybe he has been sent away with gifts like Abraham's other sons were. So good. Yes, another comment over here.
Hebrews 12 talks about Esau's character, about Esau being a funny person, also a fornicator, good for a morsel of bread, so it's his birthright. And he wanted it compared to Esau, rejected for he got the blood for repentance. It makes you wonder if maybe he felt like he had been blessed, or maybe he felt like he had become a great person. He was wanting to show Jacob who he was, even though in reality he still maybe lacked the character to pick up when he was well.
Yeah, and it's a good comment. And Hebrews paints a clearer picture than just Genesis alone. And so maybe it was a ploy or something. I don't know. Not really told. But you're right. And so, which also tell us that he loved Esau less, right? And so,
Well, you got to remember Esau was far greater than Jacob, obviously. That's going to change.
Oh yeah.
And it's going to change rapidly. And, the book of Obadiah paints a very bad picture of his descendants when it comes to their brothers, the Israelites. And so I think Esau at this time is like, well, I'm one up right now. And then he's not going to be one up. And you can see that there's a pervasiveness that went from Esau down to his descendants toward Jacob and his descendants.
Yeah, and one of the things that we never see of Esau is any relation to him and God whatsoever, which makes you wonder about his spiritual state, because he was raised. He's a twin, so he's raised with Jacob. It really has no place in Jacob's life until he comes back from Laban's house, and so the good side of the story is Jacob comes around to God, and potentially Esau never did. And of course, like you were saying with the minor prophets, Edom gets called out for their idolatry. And so God still expected them to be faithful, and they weren't. And so, which may go back to their ancestor Esau setting that pattern for them. So, good comments. Anybody else? No? Okay. This is a map that you can see. The line kind of starts there with the two camps where Esau and Jacob would have started. He goes over west to Shechem. And so that's where we're going to be. And so now let's talk about the defiling of Dinah. And so in 34 verses 1 through 7, let's read that text together. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. And he loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter, but the sons were with the livestock in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it, and the men were very indignant and very angry because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. And so here we have the story of the only daughter that we know of at this time belonging to Jacob. She goes off from the camp to go see some of the women of the land, and there she is taken, and that she is Shechem, who is the prince of the town that is there. At this time, according to archaeology, we believe Shechem was a town between 500 and 1,000 people, which doesn't sound very impressive to us, but was a decent-sized town in the ancient Near East. And so he's the prince. He's kind of had a silver spoon most of his life. He sees this girl that he thinks is nice, and he takes her by force, presumably, and he lies with her and defiles her. And so in the day where parents arranged marriages, there was little choice in the matter of whom the children could marry unless they took it into their own hands. This meant that a woman could seduce a man could take a woman by force, or they could have mutual sexual relations. This normally would force the parents' hands in marrying the children. Now the female had been tainted, and there was little likelihood of getting a suitable price or a suitor for her. And so because of this, the cost was a heavy bride price. We talked about this with Jacob and Leah and Rachel, that the average bride price was about 3 years' wages. How much did Jacob pay? 7, right? Normally, according to the law of Moses, you had to pay, and some other ancient Near Eastern texts, that you had to pay 5 years' salary if you were in this situation. And so if you had lain with someone and you were trying to convince their parents that you wanted to marry her, you had to pay 5 years' salary. Now, the average pay, we've already said, is 3 years' salary, so that's not quite double, but you're penalizing the individual for not going through the proper channels by making them pay a heavier bride price. The law of Moses even regulated these types of things in Exodus 22, 16, and 17, and also Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 26 and 27. Also, other Near Eastern laws from this time also condemn this type of action. And so Shechem decides he wants to marry Jacob's wife, tells his dad to go make it happen. Shechem is motivated by infatuation for Dinah, and Hamor is infatuated not with his love, but with his pocketbook. He thinks, this is a very wealthy family. There's not a whole lot of them, and if they intermarry with us, we can take their stuff. And so as the prince/king of this place, Shechem, he's seeing greedy dollar signs before him and the potential of this marriage alliance between his son and this woman that he has laid with. Now, one of the things that is interesting is the verb that is used here, that is translated, it could mean rape, and that he raped her. It could mean that he humiliated her or defiled her. And so the word here is very vague. It could mean a willing female participant, like Deuteronomy 22, 24, or it could mean an unwilling victim, 2 Samuel 13, 12 through 14. The word itself doesn't really tell us exactly what happened, but the idea that the brothers were enraged and that such a thing ought not to be done could actually, most people lend the idea that she was actually raped. But there is a small contingent that says that maybe she wasn't raped, but the word doesn't really help us out right there. Any questions so far on verses 1 through 7, or anything that we've said so far?
What is the thing that you not
Yeah. Oftentimes in the morning or cool of the evening, the women would go out, especially the whales, and they would draw water, but it was also kind of a social thing because this time a lot of the bond between the male, female, husband, wife isn't as strong as it is today, unfortunately. And so that was kind of their social interaction. The men went to the marketplace, the city gate, to talk with the boys, and the women went to the well to talk with the ladies. And so... Yeah. And we don't know anything about Shechem. Evidently he wasn't that great of a person, so he may have been scoping out the potential suitable potential wives or something like that. Good question. And so this takes place. We won't read the rest of this chapter, but have your Bibles open and you can look down while I give the summary, and you can see the brothers are very upset. And so Hamor comes out to Jacob and he's like, you know what? Let me let me pay for your daughter. Look, I'm sorry about what my kid did, and this will be good for both of us. This will be good for my people. This will be good for your family. We'll intermarry. We'll have a strong alliance. You'll benefit. We'll benefit. Shechem chirps up, so he's there at the negotiations, and he says, we'll pay whatever you want. Whatever bride price you want, you name it, you got it. And so Shechem's like, here's a check. Just tell me when to stop putting zeros behind the one. And so the brothers are still upset. And so Levi and Simeon, they say, you know what? We can't allow our sister to marry someone who's uncircumcised. And so if you're really serious about accepting our family into this city, and you want us to intermarry with everybody, we're going to need everybody to be circumcised. And so Hamer says, I've got authority in the city. Let me go back and talk to my guys. So he goes back to the city gate with the other prominent men of the city, and he says, look, these guys are wealthy. We can take what they got. I know we can. We just got to get circumcised. And the men talk about it and say, all right, done. Which would have probably been an interesting conversation when all the men got back from the city gate. It's like, yeah, honey, we're doing this. We're doing what? Don't worry about it. It's going to make us rich. Just go along with it. It's like, and everybody, all the men in the city are doing the same thing. And so, like I said before, the excavation tells us that at this time there was about 500 to 1,000 people in Shechem, meaning about 250 to 500 men, depending on how big you want to put the city, between 500 and 1,000. And so Simeon and Levi come in on the third day when they're all sore from the circumcision, and they take the sword and they kill them all. That's a lot of men for 2 men to kill. So it's likely that Simeon and Levi may have been in charge, had some of the servants with him. While they're doing this, the other brothers and servants plundered the city. And so they take everything. I mean, all the livestock, all the women, all the children. And so you have this family that takes literally 250 to 500 people. They kill half and kill a third and take 2/3 for slaves. And so pretty vicious. I mean, it's brutal. It's bad stuff. A lot of dead people. And Jacob finds out about it, and he's very upset that his sons have done this. And one of the reasons he's upset is because he's like, we are sojourners in this land, and you just took one of the major important cities and killed all the men inside. And he's like, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, like, they're going to come upon us and they're going to kill us now. I hope you're happy. Like, and the brothers say, are we supposed to sit here and let these men treat our sister like a prostitute? And Jacob doesn't say anything back. And so it's a very interesting thing. But it's also very interesting because one of the things that's interesting is where you find this out in the narrative. And so this is right in between. And of course it happens chronologically. But the very next thing that happens, Jacob is supposed to be getting back to Bethel and he's dragging his feet. But he's enjoyed the blessings of God. And so Shechem tried to enjoy the blessings of marriage without actually being married, and it cost him his life. They were treating Dana like a prostitute, basically. And so, but the interesting thing is, so Jacob's family has been treating God kind of like a prostitute, because they've been enjoying the benefits of him being their God, but they haven't been faithful to him. I mean, we still got his wives taking idols from their father's house. His sons, these people, they all have foreign idols. They all worship different gods. And so they're, in a small, similar way, treating God kind of like Shechem treated Dana as a prostitute. And so I think it's kind of interesting that you kind of see this play, which is why we're going to see what takes place in the next chapter in Genesis 35. Any questions or comments on what takes place in Genesis 34? Miss Susan?
Doesn't say anything about how Diana felt. She didn't have any say-so on the matter, it seems.
It's really interesting because it doesn't. We look at verse 26, verse 26. One of those verses tells us that Dana was actually living in Shechem's house. And so we don't know exactly what took place. Had Shechem laid with her and then taken her back by force to his house? Had she laid with him willingly, since he was the wealthiest dude in the town, and he's the prince of the city, and she's living in his house now, and now they're just trying to formalize the negotiations? And because this was, even if Dana was a willing participant, it would have still been extremely disrespectful to Jacob and his family to treat his daughter like that, because that's just not how you did it. It was seen as disrespectful to the family. And so we're not told, but we are told that when Simeon and Levi kill Shechem and Hamor, they take Dana out of the house.
You got to remember, Simeon and Levi are her blood brothers.
Mm-hmm.
They're not her stepbrothers. They are the same mom and dad. So they
Yeah.
have a little bit more bond with her than, say, Joseph.
Yeah. Good point. And so, like you were saying, this is they call it a blended family these days. And so this is a blended family with multiple shades, right? And so, so it's good point. And so, interested, would they be more upset? Brother Ricky?
It does make you wonder why Jacob didn't do anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Allowed this to happen, didn't allow it to happen, because he didn't happen, didn't take any action.
Yeah. It's interesting to see what his idea would have been. You know, if this would have been the scheming old Jacob, hey, I can you know, get myself more financially advanced if I do this. If I go along this deal, or if he was going to put it in God. We're not told because of the actions of Simeon and Levi, but it would have been interesting to see what he would have done or what action he would have taken. And so, good. All right, for time's sake, it's running short. I really want us to get to the very first part of chapter 35 because I think this is very important. Verses 35, verses 1 through 4. And remember, this happens right after what we just read about at Shechem. And God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and all who were with him, "Put away your foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to my God who answers me in the day of my distress, who has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods that they had and the rings that they were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. And so Jacob has finally come to the moment in his life. This is important because God says, you're gonna leave here and you're gonna go to Bethel. Jacob just told his sons, if we leave here and people find out, they're going to kill us. And God says, I need you to travel through enemy territory to Bethel. And so God says, let me put your faith on the line here and see what you're going to do. And Jacob knows that there's no way his family can defend themselves through this enemy territory, if you will. And so he puts it all on God. And he takes his family. He says, listen here. He said, give me the foreign gods. We're throwing them away. We're going to worship God. He's the one who answers us in our distress. He's the one who's blessed us. And this is what we're going to do. And to his credit, his family does that exact same thing. Now, this is very important because Shechem is a very important site. Because this is where, in Joshua 24, Joshua is going to assemble the nation of Israel at the exact same place, right? 450 years later, give or take, and he's going to give them the exact same speech. I mean, I can raise my hand. How many of us have, like Joshua 24, like verse 15, like, choose you this day whom you will serve, for me and my house will serve the Lord? Who's got that in your house? Anybody? Just a few of us with that last picture that we had for the whatever. Anyways, that was one of the options for like the bullet, not the bulletin. Doesn't matter. Okay, this is the exact same place. And so Joshua literally takes the nation of Israel and tells them the exact same thing for them to do, to make a commitment with God now or to get out. Basically, the exact same thing that Israel did at Shechem, the same exact place. This is going to be where Joseph is going to be buried. This is going to be where Jesus meets with the Samaritan woman in John 4, and he says, you know, a day is coming and now is when true worshipers must worship God in spirit and truth, John 4:24. And so you have Israel, you have Joshua, and you have Jesus all saying the exact same thing in the exact same place over the span of 2,000 years. I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, that's pretty neat. And so here's Shechem. You can see the ruins of the ancient city that are there. This is modern day Shechem between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. This is Jacob's well. And so this goes back to the 5th century when this was identified as the well at which Jacob bore, the well that Jesus sat with and talked with the Samaritan woman. Do we know for sure? No. But it's a well in Shechem, and so why not? And so if you ever go to Israel, you can go to modern day Shechem and you can drink water from the well that Jesus potentially sat at and talked to the Samaritan woman. Here's a map. You can see where those things are. And so in 35, it's time to pay up. And with our time frame, I would love to keep y'all 10 minutes late, but I like my job here at Chapel Hill. So we'll save that for next week. And so, but good stuff coming in the next few verses. And so looking forward to our study next week. Does anybody have any questions or comments in the last few moments that we have? What we've talked about so far? No? All right, well, let's go ahead and let's close with a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for the blessing it is to come together in the middle of the week and to study more about your word. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for the example of men like Jacob who weren't always the best of examples for us today, but who were able to grow and to mature and to change their lives in such a way where they could eventually become faithful servants of yours. Dear Heavenly Father, please be with us as we're all striving to change our lives each and every day to become more holy, more pure, and be more faithful servants in the task that you have given us to be a holy nation and to be a people who are peculiar and set apart from the world around us. And dear Heavenly Father, as this family was trying to be different from the people and the nations that were around them, and the patriarchs were unwilling to let their families mold themselves after the nations around them, help us to also have a desire to be set apart and to be different, not to be just like the rest of the world, but to live according to the calling that we received to be a holy nation of yours, and help us to be a family that relies on each other and helps support each other as we all strive for the same goal, and that is eternity with you in heaven. Please watch over us as we strive to fulfill that throughout the rest of this week, and help us to be a shining light in this community. In your name we pray. Amen.